So thanks for coming out today. I'm super excited to be here. There's a bunch of us from Microsoft. I'm Scott Hunter. I am the Director of Program Management at Microsoft on the .NET platform, so we're going to talk about .NET today. I've got James, who's going to come out a little bit later as well and do some Xamarin demos with me. And we have Diego and Cesar from my team as well that are here, and they're going to do 2 talks in Spanish, I believe. So anyway, let's get started. I think we've already done all this, so let's go on. We've been saying for years that .NET is the platform that you can build anything with, whether it's desktop, web, cloud, mobile, gaming with Unity. We've introduced 2 new things recently, IoT and AI, that I'm super excited about. We'll talk about today a little bit. Biggest thing is a lot of people come ask me all the time. It's like, .NET's been around. I was talking to Scott Guthrie last week, and we walked out of his office, and he was saying, man, it's crazy that .NET's been around for 21 years. For you guys, it's not been around for 21 years, but inside of Microsoft, it existed 2 or 3 years before it actually made it to the public. But we're happy to say people always ask, how's the product doing? We've added 1 million new .NET developers in the last year, and so I think that's pretty good. Open source, we open sourced .NET Core about 3 years ago. And we've been really, really happy with, you never know when you open source something, is the community going to get into it or not? And in the case of .NET Core, about half of all the contributions we have to .NET come from the public. And so we're super excited about that. This is something that we do every year. We have our own conference, very similar name to this conference, .NET Conf 2018. It's a virtual conference. It's online, September 12th through September 14th. There'll be a day or 2 of Microsoft speakers, and there'll be a day or 2 of community speakers. So write the URL down and join us for free on that day, those couple days, and see all the content we have. Now let's talk about .NET Core 2.1. I wish this conference was 1 day later, because we're actually going to RTM .NET Core 2.1 tomorrow. So you'll be able to download the bits tomorrow. There's an RC available today. But we have a couple of big themes that we really cared about. One is having awesome build performance. When we built .NET Core, we were so focused on the open source and the cross-platform, we didn't really work on the performance of the tools. We've addressed that in this release. We continue to close gaps between ASP.NET and Entity Framework to their core version. So it's easier to port your code to .NET Core. It's the same thing as well as we have a NuGet package which will RTM tomorrow as well. It's called the .NET Compatibility Pack, or the Windows Compatibility Pack. And it makes a lot more APIs from .NET Framework available, even some of the Windows-only APIs, if you want to use them. You're in Europe over here, so we all know what GDPR is. We have support for that built in. Microservices in Azure, I'll show some demos of that in a second. But let's talk about perf. This slide shows an example of what it took to build a large app. We have a CMS called Orchard that we built many years ago, and we built a .NET Core version of it. And you can see with .NET Core 2, building that CMS from command line took about 2 minutes. And you can see that with the RC, we've actually got that down to about 6 seconds. And so building large applications is going to be much, much faster with .NET Core 2.1, especially on a command line. Performance. One of the things people ask me all the time is, why should I use .NET over Node.js or Go or Java? And we made a commitment a few years ago that performance would be one of the things we would go after. And with 2.1, we continue to push this. So you can see these were our performance numbers in .NET Core 2.0. With .NET Core 2.1 that ships tomorrow, these numbers go up quite a bit. So you're going to see our plain text performance is up 12% over 2.0. Our JSON performance is up 11% over 2.0. And the biggest one over here is database access is up 123%. Massive improvements. When we run, we actually have a copy of the Tech and Power hardware. That's an open source benchmark. We don't run the benchmark for them. They run the benchmarks on their hardware, and they publish those themselves. But we actually have our own lab with the exact same hardware as they do, And in the latest benchmarks, we're top 5 in plain text, we're top 5 in data, and we're top something in JSON. We're not as good in JSON. But, and that's impressive. When you look at that list, when the benchmark comes out pretty soon, there's no tech you would actually use that's ahead of us. It's all crazy stuff that's only meant for benchmarks. We're the only real framework in that list. 2.1 brings a pile of new features. Some of the big ones that we have here are global tools. This is where you can build a .NET tool. A customer can just say .NET tool install name of tool, and it'll go to NuGet, grab the NuGet package, bring it down, crack that open, and you can just run the command on your hard drive, just like you can with npm install -g. Span of T, this is part of where our performance comes from. So this allows us to actually take memory, and instead of cloning it every single time, you can map it to other types and other things. Sockets, we rewrote. .NET Core has been built on top of something called libuv. It's the same I/O library that Node.js runs on top of. We found out that it was holding us back, so we wrote our own socket layer in 2.1, and that's where you see some of these performance improvements. HTTP client. This is something we've known has been bad for a while. We've rewritten this. It's now 10 times faster, so if you're building microservices that call other services, you're going to see that network performance go up by about 10 times. The Windows Compatibility Pack, this is a NuGet package. It'll bring directory services, system drawing, a variety of other things for customers to use. So it's going to be super good. I'm not going to get too far into EF because Diego from the team is here. He's got a talk this week as well that'll talk about this. Lazy loading is my favorite feature here, which is a big feature from Entity Framework 6 that customers have asked for that comes forward. ASP.NET Core. We think that we live in a world where I believe in the next month or so, Chrome is going to start complaining anytime it's not on an HTTPS website. So we've made even local development is now HTTPS as well with ASP.NET Core 2.1. We have Razer Ui as a library. So for the first time since we've been in the Razer world, you can actually take CSHTML files, compile them into a NuGet, and reshare them across multiple projects. So, and we use it internally for the auth that's in our templates. HTTP Client Factory. Cesar on the team is going to talk about this in his talk at the show. It is a really cool feature, which is I'm in the microservice world. I want to call an API. What do I have to do today? Well, I call the API, but what if it times out? Well, I need to check for that exception and do a retry. The Client Factory allows you to set all the rules that you might want. Hey, I want to retry 3 times before throwing an exception. I want it to be 5 seconds for the first retry, 10 seconds for the next retry, 15 seconds for the third retry. You can do all that policy built in. And of course, we brought SignalR. Our real-time framework is finally back in the core world. So it feels like ASP.NET Core 2.1 brings all the main features from ASP.NET into the core world. So as I said, shipping tomorrow. We also took SignalR, and we know that when we built SignalR for the first time, one of the biggest challenges customers had was they would call us and say, how do you scale this thing up? Do you use a SQL server? Do you use a Redis cache? How do you build your backplane for this? And so we thought in this wave that we would actually build an Azure service on top of this. And it's pretty cool. Just by one instance of the Azure service can support 10,000 active connections. You can drag a slider up and go from 10,000 to 100,000, all in about 1 second. So super cool service for building highly scalable SignalR applications. Final thing before we do some demos, IoT. 2.1 is also the first version of .NET Core where we actually have a supported Microsoft ARM32 implementation of .NET Core. We've had it in our GitHub libraries for a while. You can go to GitHub and try this stuff, but it's never been supported. We built a ARM32 version of .NET Core primarily for the Azure IoT team. So Azure IoT is based on the ARM32 version of .NET Core. But even cooler, Samsung televisions. Any Samsung television that was built this year has .NET Core built into it. The dashboard of the television is running Xamarin Forms on .NET Core on Samsung TVs. So I'm really excited about that they took a bet on us and are using that for all of their new TVs. Okay, let's do some demos. So the first thing that, from a demo standpoint, that I like to think about is microservice is probably the most overused term that I hear from in the developer space, next to containers. Everything's containers, everything is microservices. And so we have a couple things that we have coming in the next wave, which will be 2.2, that I hope to ship in the back half of this year. And one of those is a microservice template. In this case, I've got a .NET Core project, ASP.NET Core project, that's actually using what I would call the microservice template. Notice there's only one thing here. There's my controller and program CS. There's no folders, no stuff. Simple application. But one of the problems that we have here is you'll see I've got a couple of methods here. Add numbers, it takes an int, a left and a right. It adds them and returns that. One of the things that we were actually sitting in Redmond and discussing one day is debugging APIs in Visual Studio is awful. We are very, very open about that. So I mean, if I just take this project and I run it, there you go. That's a great app. It does nothing, and there's no good way other than me to guess and call stuff from that command line. And so we built a new global tool, and I'm going to talk about global tools a little bit more in the second demo, for testing APIs. And so I can come down here, and instead of running this in my Chrome browser, I can select the HTTP REPL. And this is a .NET global tool. It's using the 2.1 support for global tools. And now, if I run this application, instead of launching the browser, which is not very useful because there's no HTTP, there's no web, it actually opens a terminal up. And we've also done a couple other things. In this microservice template, the ASP.NET Core application automatically generates Swagger by default. So Swagger is a metadata for APIs, and you just get that by default in this. It also generates another open port that contains a diagnostic endpoint, and that's what this is actually connected to. And it's pretty cool. I can just type commands like ls, and that will basically, like doing a dir on my API. You can see I've got add numbers and add numbers post. And the cool thing here is I can type add 3/3. That'll basically say give it add 3 plus 3. That'll call my API, show my entire response right here, and see my result of 3. So it makes it very easy to navigate and try your APIs. And I can modify this live as I'm here. I can go back into my code. Let's bring the controller up. And we'll find the add numbers here. Here it is. And I'll change that to a times. I'll save it. And if I run this again, it'll take a second. You can see the app compiling in the background here. And this time, I get a 9 because I changed it to a, but this is even cooler. I can actually even CD into add. And now that I'm in add, I don't have to say add anymore. I can just say 3 times 3, 9. And maybe, a lot of customers, when we show things like demos of .NET Core on command line, they're like, where's the UI? I can just type UI. And because we have Swagger built in, here's my API. I can jump right in here, do the same thing I was doing before. I can say try it out. 5 by 5. Execute. Get my 25 results back. And so first-class support for APIs in .NET Core. This is coming in the 2.2 wave, but you're going to find out, if you look at my blog post, the ASP.NET blog, in the next week or so, we're going to make the sample of this available in GitHub, and you can try this yourself, so you don't have to wait until 2.2 comes out to build great APIs with .NET Core. Is that cool? Okay, so let me close that out. The next thing is, I said this tool was actually built with what we call a global tool. So I'm going to build another global tool here. and show how easy it is to build one of these things. And this is a simple app I was going to build here that basically takes a parameter in, it reverses the text, and writes it out to the console. Not a super hard app. And so let's just try it first real quick and see if I can make it work. Oh, dang it. Something's wrong here. Well, you know what? I've got my trusty friend James backstage, and so I'm going to ask James if I can spell his name right. I had to look at my phone to actually spell his name right. It's kind of scary. Mont, there he is. Look at that. He is actually saving me here. So I got James back here, and hola. I'm going to show another cool feature which is available in preview today, where James can help me debug my application. I'm sure plenty of us have been at home, or all our teammates are not in the office at the same time, and we want to work together. So I'm going to have James come out, and we're going to use Live Share. I can never think Magna Mono, whatever the hell it is. So,
yeah, I think I can add some value. We'll see what we can do here. Let me go and plug in. Now, what's cool is that I don't even have to plug in my machine or anything like that.
Yeah, so he's not actually we're not going to show his screen on the screen. We're just going to show mine. I'm going to press the Share button in my Visual Studio up here. It's thinking. And so what it basically told me here is it just said, invite link, copy to clipboard, send it to anyone you trust, or click secure info to understand more about sharing. So what I'm going to do is go back into my chat, find James here, and I'll just press paste, and he'll get this URL.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that.
And the cool thing here is it doesn't matter if James is in VS Code, or he's in Visual Studio, or wherever he's at. He's going to connect up, and we're going to be in the editor together now.
Yeah, so it just launched Visual Studio, said, hey, you're going to launch VS 2017, or VS for Mac, either or. And what I'm seeing on my machine is actually like a one-to-one, so I can actually see the code, everything like that. And there we go.
So zoom in here. Oops.
Pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and move around a little bit.
So notice as James moves around.
This looks pretty good.
See his name show up.
There's me.
Change some of the code. I'm not touching anything.
Beautiful, beautiful. I like that. And I actually get IntelliSense. I get everything in here. I like that. So I can see a whole lot more, actually, really cool. I get little squiggles. You get little squiggles. I get little squiggles. OK, so your issue is that somehow you forgot how to reverse a string.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing.
So let's add some breakpoints here. I'm going to go ahead and add some breakpoints here there for me. How's that look on yours? Maybe you have to approve those breakpoints for me. Let's make sure we get
So those look good?
Look good.
So notice I'm not touching anything, and breakpoints are showing up in Visual Studio. So James can help me debug my application. So
yeah, can you run it for me?
I can press F5 to start the debugger.
Now what's cool is that as Scott actually runs the debugger, all the debug information will come over to my machine. So
let's start the debugger here.
All right. It's building. All right, cool. Cool, I received an error.
Now, once again, I'm not going to touch anything.
Let's try one more time.
Did you get an error?
Yeah, hit OK on that for me. Perhaps. Try it one more time. Maybe stop debugging and try one more time.
Yeah, let's try one more time.
All right. Cross the conference Wi-Fi. Nope. Oh, OK. Now I'm in debug mode. Perfect. Oh, it worked.
OK, good.
All right. Whew. Whew. Oh, my goodness, you're scaring me. OK, cool. So we have right line. I see Ola. I see some arguments.
Why don't you trace into that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and step in. OK, so now I'm inside, and we can look at the length here as I go down a little bit further. Now we're in. OK, so got a new string builder. My string length. I already see what you did wrong here. So you got string length My string is passed into .NET is awesome. And my string length, though, is going to be not what you want. See, if you highlight this, you're starting at index of like 26.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? But we all know that the
String start at
index
0.
Yeah, it's
So
a
this
very
should be-
common rookie mistake.
Should be s.length -1.
Yeah, -1, there we go. So go ahead and stop debugging for me. Let me fix your code up here. Because I know that it'll be way too hard for you to remember to subtract 1 from here. So let's do -1 here. And I'm going to save it. And just go ahead and let's hit debug once more.
Start the debugger back up.
Yep. So now, again, now I hit that breakpoint. I'm going to go ahead and trace in. And we can see here that .NET is awesome, but that's your test case. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that even though I changed the code, that we all know that Xamarin is awesome. So what I'm going to do is actually change what's being passed in.
And so notice it did change in my autos window as he changed the code on his machine.
Magical. And I'm going to continue debugging. So now, there we go. My string's still there. We should get a console output. There you go.
There's the reversed version of Xamarin is awesome.
Boom. I can continue on, read the string. Boom, you didn't even have to do anything. I think it's time that I get a promotion.
That would be great if I was your boss.
Oh, that's right.
Fortunately, I'm not your boss.
Yeah.
But that's VS Live Share. And the idea is whether you're using VS Code, VS for Windows, if you're stuck and you want to have somebody help you, you can just get a link, send it to anybody that you know.
Send it to me, and then I'll fix your code. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that, yes.
Call James. How do you subtract 1? I'm here for you at any time.
We have not put a pay model into this yet where you can actually charge to actually fix code, but I'm sure that's coming. So.
Ooh. I like your ideas.
Need to talk to Julia about this.
Yeah. And that's available today, right?
This is available in preview today. I will make sure that we have a link for people to find out where they can find this.
One of my favorite features, though, too, is that even though we demoed VS to VS, is that it also works on VS Code on the Mac.
Yes.
So you could open up your Mac, you can have your team collaborating, and I could have been back in Seattle.
Well, it's crazy. You could have been on a Linux machine running VS Code, debugging into my VS. So it works in all those combinations of operating systems and stuff like that. You can see James has left the collaborative session.
Bye, fix your code, have a great day. Code review, done, amazing. James is the best.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to finish this demo. We talked about global tools. So I can take a .NET Core console app, and if I go into my CS Proj here, notice I've got this thing that I commented out called pack as tool. If I put pack as tool into my CS Proj file, then the output of my project will be a NuGet package. I can upload that NuGet package to NuGet.org, and then anybody can actually use .NET to install a command line tool. And this tool is so awesome that you've got to want to run this tool. So let's build it. And we'll go to a command prompt, and we'll just go to this folder. And what I'm going to do is I'll run .NET pack. Pack makes it make a NuGet package. And I'll say for my output folder, put this in this folder. And in the case of my machine, I've got a global feed set up on my machine that anything there is accessible anywhere. So the Hunter tool's up there. Let's go to like the root of C. And I can just say .NET tool. And I'll just press return there. You get a couple commands. I'll do install -G Hunter tool. So you can build any .NET command line tool. Do this. And now it's basically said you can invoke this tool using the following methods. Hunter tool. So now I can say Hunter tool. And I can say Madrid is awesome. And there you go. Madrid is awesome. If you're curious how that actually works, I can show that real quick. So if I come up here, go into my users folder. I can type. Okay, I give up.
Maybe just C That's a good place to start.
We'll just go and do it the old-fashioned way. If I go into my user folder, there's a .NET folder in here, and inside of here, there is a tools folder. And you're going to see this is where that command put Hunter Tool exe in here. HTTP exe is the thing I was using before in the previous demo. It's a global tool that Glenn on the team wrote for debugging APIs. And if I dig into this folder, you'll see here's where the NuGet packages are unpacked and stuff like that. But it's pretty cool that you can install tools, and at the same time, I could come back over here and uninstall the tool as well.
So no installer, no anything, just global install, done.
Done.
Done, amazing.
So great way to put in your teams, to build your own command line tools, share them around your organization. Great way just to build utilities in .NET. And because .NET is cross-platform, this works on Windows, Mac, Linux. So if I could build this and we could unpack it on one of the Macs and it would just work.
That's awesome.
So it's pretty cool. Thank you. So as I said, the .NET Core 2.1 bits are in RC right now. You can download them today, but you can wait till tomorrow and just download the RTM. So at this point, I'm going to hand off to James and let him do a little...
You didn't bring me here just to fix your code?
No.
Oh, OK. Do we have the little adapter up here? Where'd it go?
Here's an adapter.
I'm going to need the real adapter. I got a few slides and then the big crazy one. Where'd it go?
I don't know where that went.
All right, in my bag, there's an adapter. And Scott, I trust. It was here. All right, well, good thing I have your machine. You have all the Xamarin tools installed, right? Well, perfect. So I get to talk about what else you can do with .NET. Because like Scott said, you can truly build and run .NET applications absolutely everywhere. We just showed installing a global tool directly that could run on any machine. And for me, I'm all about mobile. To me, there's millions and billions of .NET-enabled devices because every iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows machine and Linux machine can run .NET applications. And I fell in love with Xamarin about 7 years ago when I was starting my job as a mobile developer back in Seattle. I was at a small startup. All I knew was C#. All I knew was .NET. I didn't know anything about iOS, didn't know anything about Android. And the first day on the job, my boss goes, I need an iOS and an Android app and a Windows Phone app. Go. And I was like, all right, that sounds great. And I was like, how long do I have? He said, 2 months. I go, great. That's way enough time to learn all of those platforms. But I didn't have to. I had to learn some intricate parts of iOS and Android. But I found Xamarin and that I could actually write native iOS, Android, and Windows applications all in C# and .NET and use all of the libraries and frameworks that I already knew. So what I love about Xamarin is that, one, you get to use all of .NET, all of C#, everything that you know and love. But you get access to 100% of the native user interface, native API access, all in C#. You get Scott that comes out and brings your bag out on stage for you with Xamarin. And you get great native performance. You add a little value. I like that. And you get great native performance across the board. So what this means, as a C# developer, anything that an Objective-C, Swift, or Java developer can do, you can do in C# with Xamarin, all in Visual Studio. Now, we know that mobile development itself, just if you're using one of the native languages, is perfect. Also perfect. Great. All the adapters work. We know that it kind of can be a little bit challenging to get started. You got SDKs and emulators and simulators and Macs and PCs and all this stuff. So we wanted to make it really easy to get started with mobile development. So we created something called the Xamarin Live Player. It's an app that you download for iOS or Android. And the idea is that it's a getting started tool with Xamarin Forms, or cross-platform native user interface. So anyone can download an app and immediately start being productive without having to worry about SDKs or anything like that on their machines. And it works a little bit like this. You get started by enabling the Xamarin Live Player and pairing your iOS or Android device over local Wi-Fi to Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac. And you do that by scanning a QR code on your iOS or Android device. And then, just like you would hit debug on another application, you hit debug, and that's it. And your app appears in full debug mode, but more importantly, you can actually rapidly iterate on your application with live run mode. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and toggle over to my Surface and show you what this looks like in action. So Sebastian can hold that. I'll go ahead and plug this in. Whoa. So much James. I like that. I don't know what that means. But yeah, that sounds good. All right, cool. There's my machine. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into New Project. And when you have Xamarin Workload installed, you get brand new Android templates, Apple TV, Apple Watch, iOS extensions, tvOS, all this great stuff, and iPhone and Android. So you get access to everything. So here we have an Android app with native Android user interface, but also an Android XAML app, and that's what I'm going to select. So it's going to be based off of Xamarin Forms. I'm just going to say File, New Project. So this is from scratch here, which is great. And this will go ahead and create my Android project. It'll also create some shared code that has some user interface in it. It'll automatically bring in any of my NuGet dependencies. So we can see here I have Android support libraries, Xamarin Forms brought in, and I'm good. Now, here in the drop-down menu, I can say Manage Live Player Devices, and I've paired my Samsung device right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and screen share it here. Now, I am plugged in, so I can see that the actual Android device is there. I have Android emulators, but the Android player is right here. So what I'm going to do is hit debug. And what this will do is over local Wi-Fi, send all of my files to the device. So nothing is compiled. And then it's going to start a debug session and display the entire application. So it wasn't compiled. Everything is interpreted on the device. So now I have my full app. It's absolutely beautiful. Like, whoa, James, such a great app. That is really good. But now I get to mess around. I love this tool because it's getting started. Like I just did file new. I had it working. I didn't have to worry about any setup on my devices or anything. So now I can just kind of mess around. I'm going to say, let's add a new item. And my application, I want maybe a master detail page with flyout navigation. So I'll just say add. And this will scaffold out a bunch more pages. Look at all that stuff that just happened. Just a bunch of stuff happened. And I'm going to come in and just make that the new startup page. So I'm going to say master detail page 1, which is a great name. And I'm going to hit debug again. This will now send all the new files over, ideally. Oh, maybe not. Let's go ahead and save it. Come on. There we go. So I saved it. I sent it over. And now I have a full master detail application in here, right? So I have page 2, I have page 3, page 4. I can do this. I can start exploring it a little bit more. But what I like is that I can come in and look at any of the pages. So here's my master detail page. Here's my master page. And instead of hitting debug, I can come in and right-click and say live run. And what this will do is it'll send the first file over to the device. So now I have a single view of the application, but I can actually explore the application. And notice that as I toggle between XAML, it updates on the device. If I want my background color to be red, here, I'll hit save. And it'll send over that new file that I just saved inside of Visual Studio. So I didn't have to stop. I didn't have to redeploy. I didn't have to do anything like that. I'm actually in here being hyper-productive in my application. I can also go back to that first main page, and I can go ahead and update it here. So I could say, hello, Madrid, and save it. I'm not even using that file. That might be something later on that I'm actively developing, but I can come in and start rapidly iterating on my application, all with my local iOS or Android device, and never have to stop to debug, to explore Xamarin Forms and this application, which is super awesome, and you can get that today. But as we proceed down building applications, we have different ways with Xamarin to build apps. What I fell in love with was the traditional approach, building a shared C# backend. So models, view models, RESTful service calls, Azure integrations, things that are the same, just .NET code. Then I would build out native UIs for each. And then Xamarin Forms came along and said, hey, you can share even more code, right? So you have that big shared C# backend, bunch of shared user interface code now over in your iOS, Android, and Windows application. And we've done a lot here because developers love both. For iOS and Android, we're introducing brand new delightful experiences to really help you be productive after you get through that first getting started. So on iOS, we've done a lot. When you need to actually deploy your application and test it on a physical device and get access to the hardware of it, you need to connect to a Mac. That's why my MacBook Adorable is here. We handle all of the setup for you. Just point it to a Mac, we'll install all of your tools. On Windows, we have remoted iOS Simulator, so you never have to leave your PC. We introduced Wi-Fi deployment to a device. Simply pair your iOS device with your Mac once, never plug it in again. Just have it sitting next to your PC and deploy. And we've also introduced automatic device provisioning. With a single button click, you log in with your Apple account, we take care of everything for you from a Mac or PC. On the Android side of things, we've built a brand new SDK manager, a new Android emulator manager, so you have world-class tools on both Mac and PC, built by us. We know that Android emulators can be a kind of pain in the butt, especially if you're running Docker, because you just can't really do it. So we fixed it, and we worked with the Hyper-V team, and we built Android Hyper-V emulator support in Hyper-V. We did not build new emulators. We extended Hyper-V to add support for Android x86 emulators, ones that you already have on your machine, so you can now do Android development, side-by-side Docker deployment, all with Hyper-V running on your machine. It's awesome. And we introduced Android Emulator Quick Boot, which means that those same emulators now boot in under 2 seconds. Best of all of this is included in Visual Studio Community Edition and VS for Mac, no charge. Pretty cool. Now, we also introduced Xamarin Forms 3.0 with tons of new fixes. This is our biggest and baddest release. Biggest and best release? There we go, that's what I want to say. 500 plus fixes and optimizations. We added right-to-left support, accessibility enhancements, a visual state manager so you can handle portrait and landscape mode, flex layout, and CSS support. It's amazing. Come to my session later today where I talk all about it. But I want to talk about one more thing before Scott kicks me off stage. I often talk about this, the shared code and that UI. But we forget about the other stuff that's built in that you need access to. Things such as geolocation, compass, key store access. Now, we expose these APIs in C# for iOS, Android, and Windows because each platform has them. But you have to go write that code for iOS, Android, and Windows. So we're fixing that. We're introducing Xamarin Essentials. It's pride of what I got to work on the last year at Microsoft. Which is a brand new NuGet that adds over 26 cross-platform APIs to access native features in iOS and Android. So you learn one API that you access in shared code that immediately work on iOS, Android, and Windows. So I figured just instead of having a beautiful, pretty slide, I'd show you what this looks like in action. So I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio again, but I have a Compass application that I'm building out. It's a very simple Xamarin Forms application. This could be a Xamarin native application too with native UI, because Xamarin Essentials doesn't matter. Here I have some shared code with .NET Standard 2.0. And I have Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Essentials NuGet installed. This is available today as a pre-release NuGet. We hope to get it out for 15.8, which is our next release of Visual Studio, and it'll be included with every template. So what's cool here is that I have a little bit of user interface, an image, a label here, and I have some data binding. So I have the image. It's going to rotate automatically here to my heading value, which is a double. And then I have a display value here. So now if I wanted to go access these and update and create a compass, I have to, go create an interface, go implement iOS and Android, all this stuff. Not anymore. Inside my view model, I have a few commands, a start command and a stop command, a little bit of code. The first thing that I did is bring in Xamarin Essentials, my using statement. So now, if I come down into my start, check this out. I can come in, I could say Xamarin.essentials. And I have access to all of the APIs immediately inside my application. So file system, flashlight, geocoding, everything. So I'm just going to say compass dot, and I'll say, hey, whenever the reading changes, let me go and call compass reading changed, which is right here, that event. And then I'll say compass dot start. Seems like an easy API. And I'll say, let's go ahead and update that for the UI. So it'll automatically ensure that it's invoked on the UI thread. And then when I want to stop, I'll say compass.stop. That's my API for a compass, 3 lines of code. Now I can come in, and whenever it changes, it sends me these compass change arguments. So I can update my heading. And here I'll say e.reading. And I'll say my heading magnetic north, so 0 to 360. And then I'll say heading display. And I'll say heading, and we'll go ahead and say we can actually just say heading.toString on there and use some C# beautiful features of string interpolation. So now what happens is whenever I look at my main page and I start the page or stop the page, I'll invoke those methods. So now all I need to do is recompile. And I could do this on Android, get it on my device, but I have it paired over here to my Mac. So you can see it's green up there. This shows me immediately all of my simulators that are on my Mac that will show up immediately. But notice something really unique here, is that it says iPhone connected via the network. So I'm going to screen mirror my iOS device over HDMI, but there's nothing else plugged in. This is just on the same Wi-Fi network. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit debug. And what this will do is build and compile up my application over my Mac and deploy it over Wi-Fi. So what I'm going to do is open up my screen mirroring tech here. Let's see if it'll open up here for me. There we go. Make sure it's plugged in. There's my iPhone. Perfect. So I'm going to open up the output, and we're going to see what happens here. So it's going to fully compile up an entire application. So I'm not running inside of the live player anymore. I want to get access to some features on the device. I'm doing more than just the UI. It's going to compile it fully, and then over the local Wi-Fi, it'll go ahead and debug it. Now, I did deploy this earlier, so hopefully it's a little bit faster. There we go. It's now deploying, and I love just looking at kind of at the output here. It says it's copying the file. This is the most fun of every demo because we put every single % that we put in there, so it's uploading. I was like, hey, I need to make sure it's working, so put all the information in there. So there we go. So it started. It's actually going to mount this, and then if I come over into my device here, I'll go full screen here. Now I have my device, and as I rotate, it's going to update in real time the heading information. I just created an entire Compass application in about 4 minutes on stage, deployed it over Wi-Fi to my iOS device, all using shared .NET code, shared user interface, creating native applications. That's how we're making it delightful and amazing to build beautiful cross-platform iOS, Android, and Windows apps in Xamarin. Thank you.
Super cool. Okay. So now let's talk about .NET Core 3. So .NET Core 3 is something we announced at Build, and it was based on user feedback. We did some user research a couple of months ago, asking customers, hey, we've got web and server and stuff working really good on .NET Core. What do you want next? And the big thing happened was, .NET Core 2, we've got web and cloud, and with .NET Core 3, we're going to bring desktop. The IoT and AI will actually work on .NET Core 2 as well, but desktop is new to .NET Core 3, and this is basically us bringing full support for WinForms and WPF to .NET Core. There's a whole variety of cool tech as part of this as well. There's something called XAML Islands, and XAML Islands is a feature that works on both .NET Framework and .NET Core. It enables you to actually take any of the new controls that have been built with UWP, Universal Windows, and make them available to WinForms and WPF. So if you want to use the latest browser control, the latest media controls from UWP, you can just host those directly in a WinForm or WPF app. We're going to take the most popular UWP controls and actually put them in the toolbox. You'll be able to add a NuGet package in. When you do, they'll show up in the toolbox, drag and drop them into your WinForm or WPF apps just like you would expect. WinForms, because we're not we'll be side by side with .NET Core, we can actually make breaking changes to make it actually have support for high DPI. And probably the most exciting part of this to me is a new .NET Core feature we're calling the .NET Core App Bundler. And this lets you take any .NET Core application, whether it's a desktop app or a web app, and basically compile it into a single file. And that single file is not just the app. That's .NET Core as well. So you can basically build any app in .NET Core, use the app bundler, and it will give you a single exe for whatever platform you build it for that contains .NET Core and your application. We will make it small by linking away parts of the code base you don't actually use. So We're actually using tech from the Xamarin guys. The same tech that James is showing to make the apps small for the devices. We'll use that same tech to basically strip away all the parts of .NET Core that you're not using and then produce a single exe. And so I'm super excited about that. We did a demo at Build where we took a WinForm application and just gave it to somebody in the audience and it ran with nothing installed on their machine at all. So very cool. A lot of folks ask, why are you going to move WinForms and WPF to .NET Core? The biggest complaint we have from people building desktop apps is Windows updates break them, because there's a new version of .NET 4.7.2 just came down with the Spring update. Spring is a weird term because it's different in every country, but whatever, Spring update of Windows came with 4.7.2, and there's changes in 4.7.2, and maybe your apps work, maybe they don't, but you get full side-by-side with .NET Core, so you don't have to worry about an app breaking when a new framework comes down. You can decide when you build apps, do you want to use put core in the actual app or actually have a machine global version of it. The most important part here, I think, is core runtime and API improvements. So, a lot of folks don't realize that the BCL in .NET Core is in some ways newer than the BCL that's in .NET Framework. And that's both by design and because we can't do something. A lot of the APIs in .NET Core have actually been optimized. But we can't take those same optimized versions and put them back into .NET Framework because we might break somebody. The reality is .NET Framework is installed on over, I think, 2.1 billion machines, some crazy number like that. And the risk of breaking applications by making a small API change are very dangerous in that world. And so the core runtime in .NET Core has a lot of improvements we can't put into that because it's not side by side. A lot of cases, the improvements in .NET Core come from the community. At Microsoft, when we fix bugs, we actually stack rank the bugs based on how impactful they are to people. But you can fix a bug in .NET Core yourself. Just go to GitHub and fix the bug. And so a lot of these are actually performance improvements by the community. And so let's do a quick demo of that. So I'm going to go here, and I've got in my folder here. Let's load this project. So what I've got is I've got a project with a couple of desktop apps. And so let's run the the .NET Framework version of this first. So I'm going to run this application. Here it is, just a regular WinForm desktop application. And I'm going to put in cback source here. And I'm going to click run. And that's going to basically go and iterate over all the files in that folder and draw a pie chart on the screen. It's kind of cool. If you can, it's a Telerik pie chart. You can click and it does stuff. Typical desktop stuff. Now, here is the .NET Core version of the same application. And to show it's .NET Core, a couple of things. I'll go edit the CS proj file. And so this is using the new SDK style projects. Very simplified project file, 17 lines. And you can see it's actually, we brought a package in for WinForms. We brought in a folder of DLLs from Telerik. Telerik did not give me new DLLs. I went and just grabbed ones out of the latest Telerik bits. This is not just grabbing stuff off the shelf. And you can see we've got this trimming thing. This is some of that stuff to actually make your app smaller. Now let's run this app. And here we go. And so let's bring both the apps up just so you see them side by side here. Here's the other app. And I'm going to take the same app and do cback source. And I'm going to press run. And I want you to notice something here. Notice the time delta between these two versions. The .NET Framework version took almost a second to actually complete, while the .NET Core version took 2.24 seconds to complete. So you're going to find that any WinForm WPF app that you move into Core is just going to be faster because you're getting these improvements in the Core runtime. When I do a demo like this, if I was sitting in the audience, I'd go, yep, that's fake, Scott. There's nothing real here. You guys just shipped .NET Core 2.1. I've got this button I can press. And what it will basically do is come up and show the DLLs that are loaded by my application. And here you go. You can see this is the .NET Shared, .NET Core 2.1, RC1. And you can see we're loading all the .NET Core DLLs. So this is real. works today. You might ask, why aren't you shipping it today if you can run it today? It works at runtime. The designers don't work yet. So we have a lot of work to make the designers work. Let's do one more part of this demo. Let's close all this out. I can right-click on this project, and I get the same publish that I have for a web application. And notice that this says basically, I want to do a desktop single file application. I can press publish. Let that go in the background here. And in some seconds, something should show up on my desktop. Give it a chance to settle out here. In fact, let me just check with VS to make sure I don't do something stupid. OK, looks like it's good. There it is. All the temp files disappeared. Here's my single exe. The single exe to me is still a little big. It's 66 megs. But that is .NET Core, a bunch of Telerik DLLs, WinForms, all in about a 66 meg DLL. I know we can make the linker get better and make these a lot smaller than this. But I could then give this app to anybody in the room with a Windows machine, and it will just work. I'll double-click it just to prove it. Give it a second here. Thinking. There you go. So .NET Core, single exe WinForm application, framework and all. Really excited about this. This is going to be good tech that's coming. I want to make sure I get one more demo in, so I'm going to skip showing another thing there. But I hope you're excited about that. The single exe part, I think, is amazing for any .NET. Preview, I hope to have later this year of this tech. Let's talk about Blazor. So this is probably the next most exciting thing that I think about is how do we make web apps even easier to write, faster? Most folks today are building their web apps with Angular, React, Vue, some kind of common JavaScript library. So you got a mix of either Java or .NET on the back end. You've got some JavaScript on the front end. You're mixing languages. The JavaScript is not type safe, or if you're using TypeScript, it is a little type safe. But you don't get some errors until you actually run the application. So you miss some of the cool parts of .NET. So this is using something called WebAssembly, which allows you to run native code inside of browsers. All the browsers support this: Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Edge, even IE11. The browsers on the mobile devices support this stuff. So it all works today. Lets you actually have C# on the client and the server. No plugins, and it's pretty cool. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and let's launch a Blazor thing here. So let's go up, and I've got a Blazor app. Give VS a second here. And I'm going to run the app. And I'll show you some cool stuff here. So let's take the app here. Let's Control F5 it. Here it is in my browser. And it looks like a spot. It says loading, like all web pages do today. Not a fan of that. But as I click around, you're going to notice that it's instantaneous. There is no refresh or server code coming in here. I can take this and click this, and it's real time. So this is a SPA application, but it's all written in C#. So let's show a couple of cool things here. I'll open up the network tab in Chrome, and I'll reload the page. And you're going to see stuff that you would never expect to actually see in a browser. Here's MS Core Lib. You don't expect to see that very often. But this is basically us bringing down a version of .NET. You're going to notice MS Core Lib is not big. It's 337 bytes. So we're not like bringing mega .NET down. We're not going to bring 60 megs of .NET down to make your app run. We basically use the same linking technology to bring the smallest piece of stuff down. But the .NET's actually running on the client and on the server. So let's take a look at this and see what this would actually mean. If I go back into VS, normally if I want to go do some like dynamic stuff, I'd have to write some JavaScript. But let's do that without writing JavaScript. So I'm going to come in here. I'm in a Razer page. In a function block, I can write some C#. So I'm going to write, hey, I want a variable called text. I'll set it to empty. And then what I'll do is I'll maybe do a void on hover. And I'll say text equals .NET 2018, because we all like this conference. And then maybe I need another one of these methods, which would be void on not hover. And I'll just set the text back to blank. Now, what I would normally do in a Razer file is I would display this up here using the @ sign. So I'd come up here and say, hey, let's do @text. @text. That's great. Typical Razer page files. But in this case, I want to do something more like that. I want to call this from the tag here. So let's just open up in here and say on mouse over. What I would normally do on mouse over is I would write some JavaScript here. But in this case, because we're in Blazor and .NET's running on the client as well, I can just say @ to call some C# on hover. And then on the way out, let's do on mouse out. I can call the @ sign again and say on not hover. And so basically, these events that would normally happen in a browser that you would call JavaScript, I can just now call C# natively. So let's save this, and let's rerun the application. See what happens. So here the app is again. And now, as I move my mouse over the text, it changes dynamically. We think this is going to revolutionize building web applications. I'll give you a great example. We have an app at Microsoft called Storage Explorer. And what Storage Explorer is, it's an Electron app, so it means it's a Node.js app wrapped in a shell that runs, and you can actually look at what's in Azure Storage using this tool. We took that application and said, we don't want to use Node anymore. Let's port it to Blazor. Now, when you port it to Blazor, one of the things that you get with Blazor is you get a native app. There is no compilation as you load the app. There is no compilation as you run the app. You get a native app. So the first thing we noticed was Storage Explorer started instantaneously. It went from a couple of seconds to start to 0 seconds to start. The next thing we noticed was that just moving and clicking around the app, the performance was out of the world. And so I think that Blazor is going to let you actually write some pretty awesome web applications without having to pile a bunch of JavaScript libraries into your application. It's also going to let you write cross-platform web apps that you can run in an Electron shell that run a lot faster and a lot smaller than running a Node.js app inside of a Electron shell. So I'm super excited about this tech, and it's freaking awesome. I'll show one more thing. This fetch data, notice there was it's me cached now, but notice it's basically showing some weather data. Let's go look at the actual app and see what that looks like. If I open up the client app here, I go to my pages, and I go to fetch data, you're going to see that basically in my functions code down here, I get a strongly typed weather forecast, and I call an API. So I'm calling my API here, and then I basically just do a for loop over the weather data that I get and display it on the screen here. Simple code here. I've got a back-end project here with a controller. Here is my weather app. So that was actually calling a server project. So it was calling a real API, client side's running C#, calling the API with C# into the back end. So you can mix both the back end and the client together. So really excited about the Blazor tech we have here. So this is available in preview today as well. I have a link to it later in the deck. Let's talk about productivity improvements in Visual Studio. So people in here, who uses ReSharper? Anybody? Lots of hands. If you're using Visual Studio 2017, you might not know that a lot of the ReSharper stuff is actually in Visual Studio 2017 automatically. And so this just shows some of the big improvements that we have coming, or actually that are in now. We have 4-2, 4 each 2-4, and vice versa. Yes. So some people like to have 4 each loops, and so you can right-click on one of those. We'll turn it to a 4 loop. You right-click on it, turn it back to a 4 each loop if you want. We have link queries to loops. If you have link and you want to convert it to a loop, we have that as well. But there's a ton of these refactorings. We have a cheat sheet. If you're using ReSharper, you should really consider taking a look at this tech. It's really good now, and you don't require a big, expensive, heavy plugin. Editor config improvements. This is one of my favorite ones. Anybody here know what editor config is? Got a few hands. Editor config is it's evil. It's basically where somebody in your organization can decide what's legal and what's not legal in your C# code. It's basically a text file where you can set a bunch of the settings in Visual Studio and drop it into your project, and the project will enforce that. So one of the cool things we have here is we have, in the bits that we have out now, we have one-click code updates coming in 15.8. 15.8 will be the next update of VS in a few weeks. And so instead of having to fix a light bulb, click each light bulb one by one, you can click one light bulb and say fix them all. But we have compiler support for editor config. Today, editor config is only an editor feature, meaning the editor complains, but if your CI/CD machine will not complain. You can now tell us to make the compiler actually enforce this. So if you don't do it, it'll fail. So let's take a look real quick at what one of those looks like. So I've got an app here. Let me close a few of these out. Let's close that down. So I've got this. So this is an app, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an editor config to the app, and I'm going to ban some stuff. So here the app is, and I can show a couple of things. This is a link statement here, and maybe you're not a fan of link. I personally am, but maybe you're not. And I can just come over here, and I'll get this new editor thing here, and I can say convert to for each. And now my loop is now converted from link to for each. That was showing that feature. I just reversed that back out. I'll go into my web app here, and I'm going to go into one of my CSHTML pages. And I think I had, yeah, here we go. So I've got a thing here. I was talking to James before the talk, and he was telling me that code like this makes C# look like Java. And he goes, that's not cool, Scott. People should not do that. And I'm like, okay, well, I can use editor config to solve that. So I can click in here, and I can add a new item. And I get to show you a bug in the process of this. It's always fun to show this. You type that, and you get editor config default 1 null. How this happens, I don't know. It will be fixed in the next minor update. But let's go here and change that to, I asked for an editor config default. I guess that's what I got. But I'll type editor config. And so it'll give me a template for an editor config, and you can see it setting my indent style to space, my indent size to 2. I could change this to tab if I wanted to. But to make this a little bit cooler, let me minimize some stuff here. I happen to have one of these on my desktop. Let's open it with Notepad. And let's paste some more stuff in here. Let's close this. And so what I'm going to say here is that we want people to use var instead of explicitly typing that stuff. So I've got these new rules that I put in here. And now, if I open the CSHTML file, notice I get a squiggle under list route. And it's like, hey, you're supposed to use var. I've now made the rules based on James. James says you have to use var. And so now I can click here and say use var instead. And it will fix my code. There you go, var routes await. And so editor config is a cool feature where you can basically just define in text what the rules are you want. You can notice here I'm able to set true or false on whether I want to force these things, and I can decide whether they're warnings or errors. If I make them errors, it won't even compile. The whole app will just die based on this. You drop one of these into the root of your project, and all developers in your team are forced to use the same indent styles, the same tabs versus spaces, whatever rules you want to set here. And in a future release, the 15.8, the compiler will enforce this as well. So if somebody tries to cheat and edit it with something like Notepad and then check it in, nope, the compiler will blow up and you're good to go. So that is editor config. I think it's an awesome feature. Let's jump back out. Progress icons in Test Explorer. We've been talking about this for about 6 months. The Test Explorer in 2017, 15.6 and above is super fast, faster than ReSharper Test Explorer. And now we've added new icons that animate so you know which tests are actually running. Visual Studio for Mac, I think I'm out of time to actually show it. But all the stuff we've been showing today around Razer, TypeScript, JavaScript, we've added all those same editors right from Visual Studio for Windows into Visual Studio for Mac. Which means if you're on a Mac and you're using Visual Studio for Mac, you get the same Razer IntelliSense, the same Razer formatting, the same JavaScript IntelliSense that we have in VS. We keep moving more and more of those things from Visual Studio into Visual Studio for Mac. We have full support now for Azure Functions and Visual Studio for Mac. And you can see Xamarin Forms on .NET Standard 2 is in there as well. And the editor config feature I just showed you is in Visual Studio for Mac now as well. So you'll continue to see us keep pushing more features from Visual Studio into Visual Studio for Mac so they become more similar products. Big one as well is version control, source control is being added there as well. Web development. The big things I want to talk about here is we have a new extension coming out hopefully in a week or two. I wanted to show it to you today, but I don't have enough time. Kubernetes is something you hear all the time. We've added full support for Kubernetes to .NET projects in Visual Studio. You can right-click on an ASP.NET Core project and say you want to add Kubernetes support to it. It adds the Helm files. And you can right-click on that solution, and we'll publish the entire thing up to Azure Kubernetes Service in Azure. So a lot of stuff going on there. If you're actually using our Docker projects today, when you right-click and add Docker to a project, we add this other project called a Compose project. That's going to disappear in 15.8 as well. So you're just going to see your code and not some weird side project. The other big thing here coming in the web space, this is something that I've been asking for about 11 years. I've worked at Microsoft for 11 years, so 11 years. We've never had great support for refactoring inside of any of our web files, whether it's an ASPX file or a .Razer file. We've never had great support for refactoring. Refactoring is coming in 15.8 in a few weeks. So super excited about those things. And skip that. .NET Machine Learning. We have this cool service in Azure called Cognitive Services. And it's basically pre-canned AI. You don't have to write any code. You call an API, and it does something for you. It's great. I've got a great example here. I'm using the text analytics API. You feed it some text. It tells you whether it's happy or sad. So in this case, this is a great vacuum cleaner. API properly says that's good. I should be happy with that. Now what's funny here, this line, the vacuum cleaner sucks so much dirt. This is very positive as well. but the API is going to see the word sucks and goes, this is not good sentiment. Bad. And this is where this technology can kind of fail. So what I would tell somebody trying to do AI in .NET is first start with cognitive, but at some point you might want to actually build your own data model. And so what you do is you find your data. And in an example that we have, we wrote some data where we took all of our issues in GitHub. Every time an issue gets filed by any of you in the room in GitHub, somebody on our team goes through and decides, hey, this is a networking problem, or this is an ASP.NET problem, or this is an Entity Framework problem. And so I have a lot of data. I have 16,000 of those things out there that have been pre-done by my team. So I already have the data, and I can take that data and I can train and say, hey, figure out why we move this to networking, or why we move this to ASP.NET. And then I can run the model. And so at Build a few weeks ago, we introduced ML.NET. ML.NET is a machine learning library for .NET developers. And the funny thing about this is we've actually had ML.NET for many, many years. All the Microsoft products, if you're using Office and it recommends stuff for you, or you're using Bing, they're all using the technology behind ML.NET. We've had this tech in Microsoft for a long time. We're not making it available to you guys. So this is ML.NET. It's a full machine learning library built on .NET. And it can actually talk to all these things here. It can talk to a core.NET, which is an open source library for .NET. It can talk to CNTK, another a library as well. And so what you'll do, we have a preview. This is the URL to grab the preview bits of this. And we have a sample that we've done where we actually built a classifier that would go take our GitHub data, and when anybody files an issue, it can actually go look at the issue that you filed and automatically put it in the right path for us with awesome accuracy. Because we put 16,000 of these things into our model, it's really good about it. And so I might show the code for this real quick. Don't have time to run it. Let me just show this real quick, and then we'll close down. So go back to source. And GitHub labeler. Second to load up. So in here, I've got a model that we created by running all that data through. And I've got some code here that basically loops through new issues in our GitHub. And you can see what it does here. I'm going to quickly try to describe it. First off, it needs a path to my model. It needs to know that we care about areas, and we're going to take an area and predict it. It then takes text, the title, and the description of the GitHub issue. It does stuff on that to turn it into binary data. We then tell it what columns we want to output, and we run it through this thing. We'll have a GUI tool that lets you actually build your own thing here, so you don't have to guess what these are. And then it basically builds your model. So hard to explain that in 1 minute, but it's cool tech. Try it out. And let me just go through a couple things here real quick. 2.1 RC is available right now. Tomorrow, the 2.1 RTM bits will be available. ML.NET preview is available right now. .NET Core 3 is announced, and we'll have a preview later this year. And try Blazor. I really want feedback on Blazor if you think it's interesting and cool. I'd love you to try it. I think we're out of time for Q&A because we've actually used all the time we have. It's time for you guys to go have coffee before the next session start. And thank you guys very much. I'll be around all day with James. Please come ask us questions.